guys, welcome back, and this week we're going to take a look at a few games based on movies for the Super NES that were actually pretty good. Now, if you've been around video games for as long as I have, then you know that movies adapted into video game form have all been, well, let's just say not very good. Generally, if you saw a game sitting on the shelf that had a movie attached to it, you knew to just keep walking, because there were some really bad ones out there. But there were occasional exceptions to that rule, and I think today's games all fall under that admittedly small umbrella. So let's get things started with a game based on a fairly divisive movie at the time that really had no right being as good as it is. Alien 3 for the Super NES is one of those games that I classify, for me at least, as a nice surprise. Now, Alien, in theory, shouldn't be hard to make into a good video game, considering the subject matter. But I've said that about a lot of movies that were turned into some of the worst games that I've ever played, so you just never can really tell. And I definitely wasn't too sure about a game based on a movie that, at the time, was considered the worst Alien movie ever made. But right off the bat, the game does make a really good first impression. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that no matter what you think about this game, I don't think that you can argue that it doesn't completely nail the vibe of the movie. You know I like my Vigigame art, and Alien 3 here it's pretty good. It's dark, it's moody, and really has that grungy, cold prison look of Alien 3 going on. All of the aliens look really good too, along with like the smaller details, like how the facehuggers skitter across the ground, and the alien eggs drip slime after you've melted them. There's even times when the lighting of an area changes when you fire your flamethrower off into the darkness. It's a really neat attention to detail. Ripley's also really well animated, almost too well, giving off this sluggish rotoscoped animation look to her at times. But I think this was just a rare example of really fluid character animation on the Super NES. So yeah, even if the rest of the game sucked, it at least looked really good while it was sucking. But thankfully that ain't the case though, because the game's not half bad either, and it's actually kind of unique in its overall structure. You essentially wander around these vents that have doors scattered around so that you can access all of the areas in that level. Think of these vents as kind of like a level hub, and at first it kind of seems like you can just go wherever you want, so that you can sort of just wander around anywhere if you want to. At least until you find a computer terminal that has missions assigned to it. Each mission will have you finding your way through multiples of areas of the prison to complete objectives, usually doing stuff like exterminating aliens, or just saving prisoners that have been trapped somewhere. The objectives are mostly secondary though, as most of what you'll be doing is just making your way to them. You do get a basic map to show you the way, but these areas can be as much of a challenge to make your way through as it is to just accomplish the goal. And I think that's where it comes down to if you're gonna like this game or not. The mission-based gameplay is really fun and unique for a game like this, but it can get really repetitive. You'll be scouring through the same areas over and over, and the only real challenge seems to come from how annoying it can be to get through some of these sections, since a lot of these levels are nested inside of each other. And the crazy thing is that you can only access your map at the computer terminals, so you better get really good at memorizing where you need to go. The action in the game is at least solid enough to keep your attention as you mow through hordes of aliens with a really satisfying arsenal of weapons, including what may be the best flamethrower in any video game at the time. Melting bugs with this thing, it never gets old. It also helps that the sound of the aliens screaming and screeching as you burn them alive is just pitch perfect. Actually, all the sound in this game is really good. Honestly, I really wasn't expecting much from Alien 3 when I rented this one back in the day. I was mainly just kind of hoping for a game I could get a few hours of fun in from exterminating aliens. But I was really surprised that I got sucked into a game that's trying to do a lot more. The super moody vibe of the game completely recreates the movie's helpless, lonely feeling of being in a massive prison complex surrounded by danger. And I think that alone is worth some praise, considering how bad most of these movies turned into games failed at representing the basics of what the movie was even about. So if you've never played this one simply due to you rightfully thinking that this is just another bad licensed video game, then maybe check it out. It's at least doing some different stuff that a lot of games didn't, and it just happens to look and sound fantastic as well. And for what it's worth, I still think this is one of the best movie-to-game adaptations that you can get on 16-bit consoles.
Game over, man!
Batman Returns for the Super NES is actually a much better game adaptation of the movie than a lot of people give it credit for. Like every kid in the early 90s, I was all about those Michael Keaton Batman movies. But the overall darker tone of Batman Returns kinda had me wondering what kind of games that we were actually gonna get from it. Thankfully, Konami was there to grab up the licensing for this movie and give us a game worthy of the Caped Crusader. Plus, they really went above and beyond, making this game stick surprisingly close to the film. The game itself is obviously a beat-em-up, but it's a really good beat-em-up, one of the best on the system actually. The action is your standard walk around and beat guys up gameplay, but there's this really satisfying crunchiness to it all. It's hard to describe it, but I highly suggest playing this one with some headphones on to hear what I'm talking about. Like you can just feel the bones crunching when Batman lays waste to yet another clown goon that decided to get within arm's reach. This definitely isn't a version of Batman that cares too much about people's overall health after he's done with them, since he'll just take a couple of dudes and smash their skulls together, or slam people through glass at a moment's notice. You've even got your batarangs that you can toss at enemies to stun them until you get close enough to do even more horrible things to them. And of course you also get your bat grapple hook so you can swing around the stage, which is great when you need to get close to a boss. There's honestly enough variety in the ways that you can beat down these clowns that it kinda makes up for their overall repetitiveness as they come at you non-stop. With all manner of dirty hobo clowns and circus people wandering around, it's like being at an ICP concert, just with less people trying to break bottles over your head. My only complaint is that I just kinda wish there were a few more different types of dirty clowns to beat up. So overall, I mean, the game looks great, it plays great, and it sounds super beefy. But what really surprised me was just how hard it leans into adapting the plot of the movie into a game. Like, check out the opening cinematic here that I sped way up, that spends a solid 5 minutes completely recapping the entire opening of the movie and then introducing both villains. This is pretty crazy for a 16-bit game. And for being a beat-em-up, it does a great job of stretching full scenes of the movie into playable stages. Of course, some liberties had to be taken here and there to make this into a fun video game, but overall I was impressed with just how close it sticks to the movie. There's even some fun details that you probably never even noticed, like how you can use your grapple hook to pull out a chunk of wall behind the first boss, just like the movie.
You missed!
Unfortunately though, it doesn't kill him in one hit, so that's definitely a missed opportunity there. Batman Returns is just one of those games I can sit down with and have fun with just about every time. This is a really solid beat-em-up, and honestly one of the better Batman games that's ever been released. It does such a good job of adapting the movie into the game, hitting just about every single story beat while giving you plenty of fun environments to beat clowns up in. At the same time, it makes you feel like you're just as powerful as Batman is, which, believe it or not, was pretty rare for games starring the Dark Knight. If only this one was two-player co-op, then we might have had an all-time classic here. As it stands though, Batman Returns is an excellent way to play a game based on the movie. Putting the movie and this game together just seemed natural, like they're the same, just
Split. Right down the center.
So check this one out if you haven't, especially if you just really hate clowns for whatever reason. Hook for the Super NES is a fun take on the early 90s Steven Spielberg movie of the same name. Now, Hook the movie seems to be fairly divisive these days, but I definitely remember it being a pretty big deal back when I was a kid. But still, I really don't know what I was expecting when I finally saw the game based on the movie sitting on my video store shelf, especially since my old friend Sony ImageSoft was publishing this one. But the back of the box looked like anything but a Sony ImageSoft game. I mean, it was colorful, the art looked good, hell, it looked like a video game for the most part. And that's more than I can say for a lot of the slop that they published. And yeah, sure enough, this actually ended up being a fun little game loosely based on the movie. And when I say loosely, I mean very loosely, since the game only really tries to recreate the opening of the movie with Peter's kids being kidnapped by Captain Hook, and then him training with the Lost Boys to ultimately defeat Rufio to finally become the one true Pan. God, I forgot about the whole Pan thing. That's still so weird to me. If you don't know, then just watch the movie.
I'm a Pan now.
But anyway, once Peter has finally become the Pan after his training, then the game basically tosses any semblance of this game being based on the movie out the window, and instead just kind of turns into an action platform game. But at least it's a fun action platformer. There's honestly not much to it, since all you're doing is just jumping and slashing your way through a variety of stages, but it's at least fun enough to keep your attention. You may at first be put off by just how slow Peter moves around, since he's also apparently forgotten how to move at a speed faster than slow jaunt. You do get a run, but it takes so long to build up that half the time you don't have enough room to get up to pace. You at least get one hell of a jump that can travel more than half the screen though, allowing you to cover way more distance than you'd think. I also love how the jumping animation really sells it too, as you just blast into the air with your fists out to the side, and then you just slowly come down in this classic superhero pose. It just looks really good. I guess the one big gimmick in the game to let you know that this is in fact a Peter Pan game is the ability to fly. But you can only fly when you stand below Tinkerbell to suck up some of her fairy magic. After that, you can only fly so much, as indicated by the flight bar at the top of the screen. And it tends to go away pretty quick, so you kind of have to get used to rationing it. But the sections where you can fly are a lot of fun. This is one thing in the game that I wish was used a little bit more often, since it only comes up for sections when the game wants you to fly. But it would have been fun to have it on a more consistent basis, especially with how the levels can be kind of wide open at times. Hook was one of those games that ended up being a fun rental, but something that I just didn't feel like I needed to ever rent again. It's fun while it lasts, but nothing really grabbed me to the point of wanting to play it multiple times. But I don't think that's really a bad thing, really. It does a good job of representing the movie in video game form, while at the same time being an entertaining platformer. Again, a rare feat for most games based around a movie license back then. But if you're a fan of the movie and never played this one, then I think it's worth a look. It may not be something that's going to keep you coming back to Neverland, but it's definitely the, Pan of Peter Pan video games. Addams Family Values for the Super NES is one of those movie-to-game adaptations that doesn't really seem like it has anything to do with the movie. Now, this is the game that was actually recommended to me by someone in the comments a few videos back, saying that this game wasn't bad at all. So I figured I'd toss it into this video if it was actually decent. And really, looking at pictures of the game and the back of the box, I wasn't really seeing what this one had to do with Addams Family Values, the movie, besides having Addams Family characters in it. Well, the answer to that is, it doesn't. Now, I've seen Addams Family Values quite a few times, and I don't think Ocean Software, the publisher of this game, had any intention on making it follow the movie at all. Theoretically, the game follows the premise that the nanny from the movie has kidnapped baby Pubert, and now it's up to Uncle Fester to save him. And I say theoretically because there is nothing in the game that really indicates this besides the back of the box. Now, I haven't played all the way through this one, so if it somehow does tie more into the movie at some point, then please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, this is just Addams Family Values in name only. And usually I don't care too much about this stuff. Like, I just got done mentioning how Hook barely uses the movie's plot at all, but at least it was there a little bit. Addams Family Values is just, it's not even in the same world. Thankfully though, there is a good game here. As you can see, this is more of a top-down adventure game in the same vein as your typical Zelda game, as you wander around as Uncle Fester accomplishing tasks for other family members. Basically by finding items and or keys scattered around the open world, opening up new sections to explore, and then making your way through a dungeon with some sort of oversized boss at the end. The world itself is actually surprisingly large, with a lot of areas to explore and items to find. It can definitely be one of those where the heck do I go kind of games at times though, but if you got a good guide or you just like wandering around until you find out where you need to go, then this is a pretty fun place to explore. Fester's only means of getting through all this is by shooting lightning out in front of him, though it kinda just comes out off-center, making it awkward to line up smaller enemies with. And trust me, there's a lot of smaller enemies scooting around this game. Your lightning also gets weaker in both length and power the more life you lose, and besides totally being that's what she said, you basically get to the point where you have to be right up on enemies if you're down to one skull. And at that point you may as well just take the hit and die because these enemies are relentless in a very annoying way. Thankfully you do get more skulls the further you get, but this is definitely one of the more annoying things early in the game. The dungeons also do a really good job of mixing things up, with some being more puzzle-based as far as making your way through, while others are a more straightforward affair. Like how the first dungeon is all about teleporters and switches, while the second dungeon has you escorting a plant around in a more action-based level. Unfortunately, the bosses that are making the homes in these dungeons, at least from what I've played, are pretty basic, but still I guess you can't ask for too much from an Addams Family game. It definitely helps that Addams Family Values is really fun to look at as well, thanks to some awesome gloomy and grimy art. Each area has its own distinct look with some nice touches like sudden storms and hazy clouds hanging over a dank swamp. There's definitely no pastels to be found anywhere in this game. Uncle Fester himself is even pretty cute in a bug-eyed psychopath kind of way. I also really love all the Addams Family specific text in the game, and this is one thing that actually really does feel like the movie. The developers did an excellent job of each character giving off that trademark Addams Family movie vibe here. I just wish there was more of it. But overall, this is a surprisingly fun Zelda clone set in the Addams Family universe. I guess just don't come into this one expecting it to have anything to do with the movie, because it's definitely doing its own thing. Thankfully, that thing is pretty good, making this one Addams Family game that's surprisingly actually worth your time. And that's gonna do it for this week, guys. Now, I'm not saying that any of these games are all-time classics, but for being games based on movies, I think they did their job at making the movie into a pretty fun video game, with all of them representing their respective movies pretty well, except for Addams Family, which just kinda said I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want. And for as rare as that was back then, I think they deserve props for that. But I'm curious if any of you out there have some games based on movies that you really liked. So let me know in the comments below, because I'm sure I'll be doing another video on this very subject in the future, since these games just kinda morbidly fascinate me for whatever reason. Oh, and I don't think I need to remind you all to give this video a like and a sub if you happen to get some sort of enjoyment out of it. But I think that's gonna do it for me this week. So check back next week for some more video games to talk about. But until then, thanks for watching.